Have you ever noticed something strange about the famous photos from the Apollo moon landings? Neil Armstrong standing proudly on the lunar surface? Buzz Aldrin saluting the American flag? The lunar module sitting in the dust? But take a closer look at the sky behind them. It's completely black. Where are all the stars? This question has puzzled millions of people for decades. Some even claim it's proof that the landings were faked on a Hollywood soundstage. But the real explanation is far more fascinating, and it reveals a lot about how cameras, light, and even our own eyes work in space. Today on Amazing World Facts, we're diving deep into the mystery. Why you never see stars in NASA's moon photos. Stay tuned, because the answer might completely change the way you think about space photography. First, let's rewind back to the 1960s. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in the space race, and reaching the moon was the ultimate prize. Between 1969 and 1972, NASA's Apollo program sent 12 astronauts to the lunar surface. They carried not just scientific instruments, but also specially modified Hasselblad cameras, designed to capture the most historic photographs in human history. These cameras produced the famous shots we've all seen: astronauts in bulky white suits, the lunar module perched on the surface, the American flag planted in dusty gray soil. But one thing is missing in every single photo: the stars of space. And that absence has fueled endless debates, conspiracy theories, and confusion for more than 50 years. Some people argue that the missing stars prove the photos were staged. The theory goes like this: if NASA filmed the landings on Earth, they couldn't replicate the appearance of stars, so they just left the sky black. Supporters of this idea often point to Hollywood movies at the time, where space backdrops were painted with little dots of light. But here's the thing: professional photographers, astronomers, and even amateur stargazers know the truth. And the truth is far less dramatic than a grand government cover-up. To understand why the stars aren't visible, we need to talk about exposure settings in photography. Imagine you're outside at night with your phone camera. If you want to take a picture of the stars, what do? You increase the exposure time, letting more light into the lens. That's why astrophotographers often leave their cameras open for several seconds or even minutes to capture the faint glow of distant stars. Now, picture yourself on the moon during the Apollo missions. It's daytime. The sun is blazing overhead. And because the moon has no atmosphere to scatter sunlight, the surface is lit extremely harshly. The ground, the astronauts, and the spacecraft are bathed in bright, unfiltered sunlight. So, the astronauts set their cameras for short exposure times and small apertures. This allowed them to properly photograph brightly lit objects like the lunar surface, the lander, and each other. But here's the key. With those settings, the faint light from the stars simply doesn't register on film. It's the same reason you don't see stars in photos taken on Earth during the day. You might be thinking, but the moon looks gray and dull. How could it be that bright? Great question. The lunar soil, or regolith, actually reflects a surprising amount of sunlight. Not as much as fresh snow, but enough to make the surface dazzling under a black sky. Astronauts often describe the moon as almost blinding, especially when the sun was high. This intense brightness forced them to use camera settings similar to what photographers use in a desert at noon on Earth: fast shutter speeds, low ISO, and narrow apertures. And under those conditions, the faint stars, millions of times dimmer than the sun's reflection off the moon, are invisible. But wait, couldn't the astronauts see stars with their own eyes? Yes and no. During the lunar day, with the sun shining, their eyes were adapted to the bright surface. Just like your eyes adjust when you walk outside on a sunny day, the astronauts' pupils contracted, making it nearly impossible to see faint stars against the black sky. However, during the journey to and from the moon, when the spacecraft was in shadow, astronauts reported seeing a breathtaking sky full of stars. In fact, Michael Collins, who orbited the moon alone during Apollo 11, said the stars were everywhere and beautiful beyond description when he was in darkness. So, the stars were there, they just weren't visible when the cameras and the astronauts' eyes were focused on the brilliantly lit lunar surface. This phenomenon isn't unique to Moon. Even today, astronauts aboard the International Space Station rarely capture stars in their photos of Earth. The planet is so brightly lit by the sun that stars vanish from view. The same thing happens with space shuttle photos, satellite images, and even with cameras mounted on Mars rovers. Whenever a camera is adjusted to capture a bright subject, the stars fade into invisibility. Only with long exposures, specifically set up to photograph the sky, do those stars appear. NASA has addressed this question many times. Their official explanation is straightforward. The moon photos were taken with the correct settings to capture astronauts and equipment in direct sunlight. Stars are too faint to show up under those conditions. In fact, NASA points out that if stars had appeared in the images, they would have actually been suspicious. Why? Because it would mean the photos were double exposed or artificially edited, something the Apollo team definitely didn't do. Let's bust some of the most common myths about this topic. Myth 1: NASA forgot to paint stars on their fake moon set. Reality: stars are invisible in short exposure photos taken in bright light. Myth 2: the absence of stars proves the landings were staged. Reality: professional photographers know it's completely normal for stars not to appear in such photos. Myth 3: stars should be visible because the sky is black on the moon. Reality: a black sky doesn't automatically mean stars will show up. Camera exposure matters far more. When you line up the facts, the missing stars argument collapses under its own weight. So, how could astronauts have photographed stars from the moon? They would have needed to deliberately point their cameras at the sky, block out the sun, and use long exposures. But the Apollo missions weren't designed for astrophotography, they were focused on geology, exploration, and engineering. Every photo taken on the surface was carefully planned to document the astronauts' activities, equipment, and the environment. There simply wasn't time to adjust cameras for stargazing. That's why no star-filled lunar sky photos exist. Not because the stars weren't there, but because the mission priorities were elsewhere. Interestingly, there was one Apollo experiment that captured stars. Apollo 16 carried a far ultraviolet camera. Astronauts set it up on the surface, and it took long exposure images of stars, nebulae, and even Earth's atmosphere. Those photographs are rarely shown alongside the famous moonwalk pictures, but they prove beyond a doubt that stars can be imaged from the lunar surface when the equipment is set up correctly. So, if the explanation is so simple, why does this question keep coming up? The answer lies in human psychology. We expect to see stars in space because we're used to night skies on Earth. When we see a black sky without stars, it feels unnatural. Add in decades of conspiracy theories, mistrust of governments, and the sheer drama of the Apollo story, and you've got the perfect recipe for misunderstanding. But the truth, as always, is in the science. The missing stars in NASA's moon photos aren't proof of a hoax. They're proof of how light, cameras, and human vision really work. On the moon, the sun shines with blinding intensity, and cameras were adjusted for astronauts and equipment, not for the distant stars. So, the next time someone points at a moon photo and asks, "Where are the stars?" you'll know the answer. They're right where they've always been, shining faintly in the background, just beyond the reach of the cameras that captured one of humanity's greatest achievements. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind this space mystery, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Amazing World Facts, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next deep dive into the wonders of science and history. And remember, sometimes the most amazing facts are hidden in plain sight, or in this case, in the dark sky of the moon.